when we start working with our grids in InDesign, for the purposes of this assignment too, if they're fairly loose, I understand like we can kind of consider this this first assignment, the digital portion, more like sketching anyway. So this is where like last class I said, I don't expect you guys to measure, I mean, obviously if you do, awesome. But I don't expect you guys to measure the gutters and the margins and this and that. If they're give or take, I'm fine with that. If you have a weird size magazine and you want to actually get like the actual sizes, things like that, that's totally fine. Or close to it. Sometimes, I don't know, you might have a smaller, you might choose a small, I can't think of a smaller magazine off the top of my head, but you might have a smaller magazine where it's like 5x7 or something like that you could roughly do. So if these aren't like super exact, I'm not all that concerned with it. Here we go. So we're going to do new document, much like any other, opening a new document in almost any other program. Here is where InDesign is super, super quirky. I believe it defaults, I think I mentioned this last class, it defaults to points. So if you have, so this is letter size, so this is technically 8.5 by 11, it's just giving you the point dimensions. So if you have another size, for argument's sake, like if you want to have a document that's 5x7, if you just type 5 and then you can hit tab to go to your next section, or if you just click into the next section, you'll see it defaults to 5 points, which is not what you want. So you need to actually type in 5, and if you hit IN and then tab over, now you'll see it actually makes it does the translation for you. I know that's not the right word. So if you do 5x7 inches and then hit tab, so it's 30 by 42 points. I believe you can change that in your preferences, but since we're using lab machines, I don't think those preferences will hold. We can test it, but I don't think those preferences will hold. So just keep in mind, I do it all the time. I'll find myself, I'll type in like, I have an 8x10 document, blah, 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 and I'll just hit 8x10 and then hit OK, and then I wonder why my size is weird because I forgot to type in inches. So anytime you see this P for pretty much everywhere, you just have to make sure you're typing in inches. And even with columns, margins, etc. So if you wanted to have like a quarter inch margin, so you're hitting 0.25 IN and then tab it, and then since these are all locked, it'll do it for the rest of the three remaining edges. Or again, 0.875 inches, and then it does the conversion is the word I was looking for. It does the conversion for you. So for argument's sake, let's say those are our margins for my document, right? When we're setting up our grid structure, our columns, this is where we're going to be setting up the columns to our document. So you have your, let's say for argument's sake, we have our 3-column structure, right? And our gutter, I'm going to do the same as our margins here, and make sure I type in our inches. I could have copied and pasted that, I suppose. We're not going to worry about bleed and slug right now. We'll get to that later. So what it's going to do, and I'll actually preview it, or not. There we go. So what this is going to do is, and you can see I have our 5x7. I'll go back to letter here. There we go. And these margins are actually rather large. I'm going to go to 125 is what I meant to do. Oops, and see I just did the inches thing. 0.125 is what I meant to do. There we go.
I have a question.
Yes?
So you change it to letters. That would automatically change the points of the width and the height?
Correct. Oh yeah, since I just so the question was, since I went back to letter, yeah, it automatically, because it's a default, it's just a default setting. So yeah, if you have like legal, you'll see the points will change here. Yeah, I just went back to letter really quick just because it's a standard, because I was at 5x7 and whatever. So yeah, I went back to letter and it automatically changes this. And you'll see once you start to do, even if we did like arbitrarily 60 points, it'll automatically switch back to custom because you're using a custom size. So yeah, for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to go back to our letter. And this is where hitting preview comes in handy because you can actually see your margins and your gutters. So this is going to be your overall setup for your document and for this particular assignment, right? So if you have a 3-grid structure, or if you have, or rather 3-column structure or a 6-column structure, generally, and you'll see too as you look, I don't have an example off the top of my head, you'll see if you have like that motorcycle, go back to it really fast. This motorcycle example, you know, for argument's sake, instead of 7, let's say this is a 6-column that looks like it's 6-column. You can have it broken down to a 3-column structure where they break down some of the columns into subcolumns, and this will all make sense and hopefully in just a second. So you get your overall, when you set up your document, you're setting up your overall setup for your document, right? These, you can change them later, but these generally, they're different than guides, and this is where InDesign can get kind of confusing because you can set up guides, which we will, to do those extra, technically sort of extra guides between your column structure, right? So we're going to hit OK. So this is where we have our basic column structure, right? So if you wanted to set up guides, you're going to go to Layout. Everything having to do with kind of page structure is under Layout. And so we're going to create guides. So what this allows you to do is this allows you to create a set of guides rather than trying to drag them out from the, you know, it's not going to let me right now, but trying to drag them out from your rulers to set them up, you know, so you have a guide here and a guide here and a guide here. This allows you to just do that all in one sort of fell swoop. So what we can do is we're going to fit guides to our margins, and this will essentially reflect all of these margins, right? So your guides, I'll show you, but so your guides will match up with your columns, right? So what we're going to do is under rows, oops, helps if I hit preview, oops, not rows, columns. So you can see now that we have 3 columns here, and now these guides are a little bit off. It's kind of tough to see the blue against the pink there, because our gutter is slightly different. So we want to make sure our gutter is the same, and we're still typing inches, right? And I'm hitting Tab instead of OK, so I'm still in this preview window. And this is where you want your guides to fit to the margins rather than the page, because you see as they fit with, if you fit them with the page, it lines up your first guide with the edge of the document, so it kind of throws off all of your, like especially these two, it throws off all of your other guides a little bit. So we're going to align to margins, or fit to margins. Personally, I would have rather called that align, but whatever. So it aligns the guide with the margin rather than the page. So as long as you have your margins and your guide margins set to be the same, they'll totally match up. So this is where we're not just mirroring the column structure with guides, right? This will actually serve a purpose. If you want to break down, like that one sample that I showed you last class, if you want to break down your columns and give yourself a more visual cue, to where, like, again, you have a 3-column, your actual structure is 3 columns, but you want to give yourself some guides to split those columns and still have the gutters be set up similarly, so that way you could have, you know, an image just go to here and then it reflects that gutter. Does that make sense? So this is where the guides more serve as a visual cue for layout, whereas your actual column structure when you set up the document is sort of like not set in stone, but sort of more set within the document, right? That was always a hard one to explain, the difference between difference between the guides, because they're both visual cues, but the difference between the guides and setting up your columns in your document. And then your rows, you can do however you would like. Again, if you want to set it up to where you have, and that's, bless you, that's going to depend on, it's going to be a little bit off because it's going to depend on the size, since we have a 8.5 by 11 document here. Those are pretty close to even. So if you wanted to give yourself some rows as well with the same gutter. Again, going back to that sample that we had that was like that, I think they had, I forgot how many guides they had, but they had like a ton of small squares with the cross-ish graphics and things like that. I can show you again, but so this basically will just give you an idea to rough things out. And you don't have to have rows in this. You can, again, I'm going to go back to 0 in this case, just so we have just so we're concerned with our grid and our guides, right? So now our guides are kind of matching up with the grid and reflecting that grid. I'm also going to lock these. They may or may not default to be locked, because I think we shouldn't be able to move them, but you can kind of select them. So just under guides and grid, I'm going to lock everything just so I don't accidentally, now I can't select them even if I wanted to. So when we're setting these up, again, think of these as like sort of digital thumbnails. So we're going to be using either one. In this case, it doesn't really matter. You can use your frame tool or your shape tool to set up your blocking out of things. So if you wanted to have, and I'll know you don't have to. Some people would color code them when they hand these in. Some people don't. You don't have to. But if you have, like, obviously I'll see the page that you're referencing. So let's say your page has an image that roughly goes across, these two columns and this gutter. You're just drawing a box, drawing a square, just like you would in any Adobe program, right? And then here, it automatically defaults to having 0 fill. And again, like any other Adobe product, there's like 3 different places you can change it if you would like. But you can see in your control, you have your fill here. You can also use your swatches or your color palette, but you can click here, or again, this will reflect your swatch palette. So let's say you're just using green for images, and then you have, I'm trying to remember that one motorcycle one that was a little bit sort of set up a little bit goofier. You have a block of text, like your title text here, and we're going to fill that. We'll just fill that with cyan. So this is like that title text. And then here's where you can use, you don't have to redraw all the time. You can, certainly. But you can also copy. You can either copy and paste, or what I do all the time is I use that option and drag, and that automatically copies. But same thing as copy and paste. So if you had your text here, and then I just realized I forgot to do something. And then I'm holding down my option and holding shift to keep it in place there. So you have your block of text here, and then again, let's say for argument's sake, this block of text goes all the way up to here, and then I'm going to make that not reach over that gutter. So you can see generally this is our sort of loose-ish thumbnail, right? So where the green would indicate image, the blue would indicate text of some sort. So these are a way just to sort of like roughly thumbnail what we're doing with the assignment, and also hopefully get you to sort of start to get used to the interface. Really is what I want to do. I know those of you that are familiar with the Adobe stuff will have a general sense, because it does look the same, but there are some quirks that you'll find as you start working through this. There are a couple little quirks that InDesign has. Just being a page layout program, it handles things slightly differently. But again, I just wanted to have you get used to setting up a document, and then setting up your thumbnails. So this is basically what you'll do is once you have that first hand-on thumbnail, or not, yeah, thumbnail, and then you're going to be recreating that grid digitally just to sort of get used to InDesign. The last thing that I forgot to show you was when we're working with a new document. Preview, okay. So let's just do, I'm just going to leave everything at the default just to show you. So when you do number of pages, so I'm going to tab through. That's not letting me scroll. It's not letting me, okay. When you tab through, we have facing pages, right, which means that the pages that are next to each other will open as a spread. If you have a document that you want to start on the left-hand side, like if your spread starts on the left, you would do your start page as start page 2, technically. So I previewed that just so you can see. So now your start page is going to be here, and then technically page 2, and then page 3 is going to be all by itself. So once I hit OK and zoom out, you'll see. So now we have our 3 pages like this instead of the inverse of that. So that's all. And then for these, we're just doing the 1 page in the digital. We're not doing all 3 of them, so don't worry about that. I know that probably was kind of confusing, and I don't know if I was super specific with that in the assignment. But yeah, so if you wanted to, again, sorry, I don't know why I went down there. So as we go to 3 pages, I'm going to start this page on 2. I don't know if I closed that one or not. We'll start this on page 2, and I didn't do any margins and grids on purpose. Versus 3 pages starting on page 1. There's the difference. So it starts on the left-hand side. And you can always, we get into later, when we get into more specific InDesign things, with your page numbering. So now it starts 2, 3, 4, and this one starts 1, 2, 3. That numbering, I don't want to say it's arbitrary, but you can change that. So if you have an article that's starting on page 32, you can have the page numbering start on page 32. So the default page 1, 2, and 3 is just kind of that, is what it is. It is the default. So what I will have you do, I'm not sure if I was specific about the assignment. What I will have you do is create all 3 pages in InDesign, because it should be fairly easy, right? Because we're just doing this job, right? So theoretically, once you have your grid structure, I'm just going to copy, paste here. So theoretically, when you set up 1, even though we're a little bit off because I didn't set up margins or anything, if you had, and again, I'm just using that copy function, let's say for argument's sake. That's way off, but you get the idea. So there's our page 2, and then our page 3, and so forth. Because setting up these for all 3 pages should take you like 5 more minutes, maybe, right? These aren't too crazy to do. What's that? Yeah, that your page number. Yeah, your page number doesn't have to match. Do you mean like?
It doesn't have to be the exact same style on every page. It shouldn't be anyway.
No, if you're emulating your 3 pages that you're getting from your magazines, they're not going to be. Well, I mean, they might be. If you had a magazine that was fairly traditional, and your article looked like this, then technically, page 2 and 3 look exactly the same, right? Like if you had an image with a title and then some copy and then just 3 columns of copy and 3 columns of copy, it's kind of a boring layout, but there's magazines that do it. There's magazines that are like all copy and it's all 3 columns, you know what I mean? But like, for example, let's say this was our magazine, I just created the 2nd and 3rd page, and I mean, I know I'm not new at this, but. Correct.
And the 3 pages from the magazine.
Exactly. They're gonna mirror what you're basically thumbnailing what your magazine looks like in InDesign.
One
Correct. Right. Yep. And if your article, not to totally confuse the issue, if your article is like 3 pages or 17 pages, that's fine. You're just taking a sample of 3 pages. So it doesn't have to be the start of the article either, not to further confuse the issue. It can be in the middle of the article. It can be, you know, you're just grabbing 3 successive pages from an article. So whether your article is 3 pages or 300 pages, you're still only grabbing those 3, right?
Or 3 1-pages.
3 1-pages? No. 3 single page? No. Anyway, sorry.
What about the one page that you don't like?
Yep, the 1 page that you don't like can be from your sample pages. It doesn't have to be. You can choose a completely unrelated to the article. It has to be part of the same publication, though. So you're picking 1 page that you feel can be designed better from each publication. And that you're just thumbnailing. You can thumbnail digitally or you can thumbnail physically. That you're just like literally sketching. But that one, you know, I've had students, one of their 3, their redesign page was one of the 3 that they picked, or they saw 1 page in the magazine after they were doing something, and it was like, a lot of times it's easier. Well, it may or may not be easier. It just depends on what you want to do. It doesn't have to be one of the 3 that you picked, but it can be. That's a terrible answer, but.
So we only need to turn it in 3 pages. Digitally. I'm confused here.
There's gonna be 2. Yep, there's 2 documents. So you're gonna have 3 pages per document because you're picking 2 different publications. So you're basically doing this twice for 2 publications. But yeah, so you're gonna have 2 InDesign documents that roughly look like this for each publication, and then you're gonna have 1 page from each publication that you redesign, which don't have to be. The redesign doesn't have to be digital. It can be if you want it to be, but it doesn't have to be digital. Because I'm just having you like thumbnail, like literally just spitball, like thumbnail the idea. So that one can be physical, you know, on paper if you want. Yep.
Magazines total then.
Yep. Exactly. I know this first assignment is not a great. I try to like keep it somewhat simple, but introduce you to the interface, and it always gets more convoluted than I want it to, and then I over-explain it. Are there any other questions?
So we're just thumbnailing the page that we don't like.
Correct.
The 2 pages, I mean, from each one.
Correct. Yep.
I thought we had to do a digital copy of that as well.
You don't have to. Like I said, some people did do it digitally just because they're more comfortable doing it that way. And like personally, I would probably do it digitally just because I feel like I can do this faster than I can actually draw it out for some reason. It's probably the same amount of time either way. But for some reason, I'm probably just more comfortable doing it digitally. So if you're more comfortable doing it digitally, you're certainly welcome to, but you're not required to.